Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on the podcast like we always do. The organization is Approval Voting for San Antonio, a city very close to ours. We're in Austin. So welcome to the podcast, James.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We are glad to have you. So if we can kindly get started by you giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Okay, my name is James Holland. Since around the college years, I've been involved in politics in various ways, particularly with the Libertarian Party and the Liberty Movement. And through that, over time being chair, vice chair, all the things in Bexar County, which is the county of San Antonio, and being somewhat involved in the state party, you learn pretty quickly that the voting system is somewhat of a roadblock in that. So over the years, learning about that and advocating for various alternative voting systems, I came across approval voting, and at that point, I've pretty much decided that's the way to go at this point. And when that happened, I formed a bit of an organization. It's more of a name and a movement to it, which is Approval Voting Texas, Approval Voting San Antonio, and since then I've maintained some organizational activities and I've advocated in certain ways. So that's kind of how I came through there. It's being an activist in a third party.
Oh, good. That's an interesting trajectory. We have a lot of people who we interview on the podcast that are involved in nonpartisan reform organizations, also alternative parties. Some people do one, some people do the other, some people do both. So it's interesting. So how is that the two differ? The advocacy for in the nonpartisan approval voting activities versus the partisan Libertarian Party activities.
Absolutely. I mean, it comes through there, but you notice in San Antonio elections, most municipal elections here in Texas, they're nonpartisan. So, but you also get more than two people running. And when that happens, there's problems that happen with just being able to vote for one. And,
Sure.
certainly see that for San Antonio mayor and several of the San Antonio city council seats. And I mean, you'll see it pretty much anywhere where they have three people running for the same position or more.
Sure. So our audience is well educated on voting things because most of our audience is involved in alternative parties in some way, shape, or form. Yet some people may not be familiar with approval voting. So kindly explain what it is and maybe how it differs from other types of voting.
Okay, there's several different alternative ways to vote. Approval voting is probably one of the simplest. It's certainly the easiest to implement with current voting software and the computers, of course, they use for the voting. Basically, what approval voting is instead of, let's say, 5 people are running for a race, instead of choosing just one to vote for, you can vote for more than one. So say you like 3 of the candidates and you're okay with them, you mark for 3 of them. Or, say you just really only like one. You just want to vote for one and do it the same way as you've been doing it before. You can do that as well. It doesn't really hamper you from doing what you've been doing for years and years and years. So it's a very simple thing to implement. However, the power of it is extremely strong when you do that. It's powerful both from the perspective of major party, major candidates, and certainly from the point of view of a third party or a candidate that might have more difficulty trying to reach that major status.
Sure.
One thing you'll notice is you're already starting to get a lot of talk about the Democratic a candidate, and of course Biden being reelected, so the presidential race, and they're worried about third-party runs that could potentially split the vote.
Yep.
And that's only an issue because we don't have approval voting. Approval voting essentially fixes the vote splitting problem. If I was, say, didn't want Biden to be reelected, or it could be on the other side, didn't want Trump to be reelected, one of the best strategies you can do is simply run a candidate like them that is fairly popular and siphon away votes from them. You could spend, a small amount of money doing that and have a bigger impact than spending all that money advocating for your candidate. And that's just a flaw in the old first past the post, vote for only one voting system. So that's the major issue, and that's always been the issue for third parties, and it's very difficult to get through. But we're actually making some progress recently.
Oh, good. What progress specifically?
Of course, I'm talking about more of a national context here.
Oh, okay.
Of course, with that, we've had some, major cities, pretty much cities that everyone's heard of, has actually started implementing the approval voting system.
Okay.
The first one, of course, is Fargo, North Dakota. They'll always be known as the first city to implement approval voting.
Awesome.
So they get that, and they've been doing it for, I believe, 2 election cycles since 2020. So they've had 2 elections, I believe, and they really haven't had anyone with problems with it other than perhaps some people in the larger parties are trying to get rid of it, but that's always going to be the case for something that helps. Democracy do things it hasn't done in the past.
Yeah. So Fargo didn't fall apart because they implemented it?
Yeah, Fargo is not falling apart. It's doing quite well.
Good.
So as far as the people that are using it, they're quite happy with it. And that's really what matters.
Yep.
The other big town that just recently implemented it, I want to say it's been a year or 2 ago, is St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh.
So, it's a good size city there.
Yep.
And so city by city is starting to implement it. And you get the evidence of how well it works. So that's always the first argument, is like, okay, fine, you used it in a small organization. The Libertarian Party uses it. The Green Party uses it. But you haven't really had it in a competitive, election in a town for real seat mayor, House of Representatives, president. But now we have it in good-sized cities, proof that it can work just fine.
Okay. So I imagine as you go through this activism, people object to what you're doing. What are some of the arguments that people put against your efforts, and how would you counter their arguments?
The arguments against it, usually it's not from someone that knows voting systems particularly well. You can get 2. One is from certain people, they just like the way they've been doing it before. For some reason, voting for more than one just seems unfair to them somehow. Like somehow there's gaming to the system that's happening. But my argument to that is you're not taking into account the fact that just voting for one candidate is actually allows a lot of gaming system. Like I suggested, the best way to hurt a candidate from winning in the current voting for just one system is help a candidate that may not be doing too well, help them get ballot access. That's really the big thing that they do, is say, all right, we'll get them on the ballot, and they're going to get 5% of the vote, 10% of the vote, and you can only vote for one of them, so the people that really like that person are going to take those votes away from the other. They call it taking their votes. Really, they're expressing their opinion, so you're not taking anyone's vote, but you basically split votes, and that's how you do it. You could run 1, 2, 3 candidates against them. The more you do that, the more percentage of votes you take away, the more you help the candidate that you like. So it allows for a lot of gaming of system, and then a lot of worries, like, this person's running, they're getting a lot of support, and I don't want them running. So you have, in this example, and it happens in the Republican Party too, Democrats hating someone that actually has opinions that are quite similar to their own, just because they're not the exact same, they're running against them and they're splitting that vote.
Yeah.
So really the gaming of the system, the unfairness is in the current system, or else there wouldn't be people like me. There wouldn't be people in Fargo, and there's Seattle there too, St. Louis, that are in favor of these voting systems because it's perfect the way it was. Why would anyone care for a new system?
Sure.
Clearly not perfect. So they can't articulate why they don't think it. Like I said, it's just they don't feel right. It's like there's one to win. Why would you vote for someone that you don't want to win? It's like, well, we all kind of know that, we're not in charge of how other people vote. So we kind of have a second choice. Even if we have a first choice, there may be one that we like better than the other if there's 3 choices. So
Yeah.
with approval voting, it fixes this. You can vote for, it doesn't matter, let's say 10 people are running for an office. What makes it work is if you really didn't want someone to go in office, you could vote for all 9 of the other candidates. And so that really balances the vote. So you have, 1 vote for the candidate and 1 vote that can completely counter is like anyone but that candidate.
Yeah.
And so you don't have that with just vote only 1. If you have 2 people running, yes, you have a vote for, a vote against. But if 3 people run, then it takes 2 people to counter the votes of the person you don't want, because you have to vote for one, you have to vote for the other. So it's not a completely balanced system, and you see that a lot with the mathematics of it. Some other objections, not really so much from that crowd. It's really vague stuff there. There's another crowd that, there's alternative voting systems, so approval voting may not be their favorite choice there. You hear about ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting, and there's just a ton of different ways of doing stuff. They start making it complex. They talk about open primaries, and there are single primaries for everybody, and proportional representation. So once you start learning about these things, you could arrive at you prefer another voting system. The big alternate that I think most people in this way of doing it are generally for is going to be either the ranked choice voting, which I believe they choose the instant runoff voting method every time on that. They just don't like calling it that. And the other crowd is proportional representation. Which is a little bit more difficult in the American system. You have to pretty much change everything for that. So it's a little more difficult to implement. But yeah, people say, I want proportional representation, but my second choice is instant runoff voting or single transferable votes. I may mention that system, or approval voting. So when you get into the weeds of things, it can get pretty complicated, but approval voting itself, which is one of the reasons I love it, is it's simple.
Good.
You can vote for one or more. That's the only words you're changing on the ballot. You're adding in or more. And it's simple for everyone to understand. You just have to, make a check on a person or fill in the ballot hole, or essentially you're pressing a button on the computer these days. Whereas those other systems are a lot more complicated. But split voting fixes the problem. The main problem, vote splitting.
Makes sense. So you're talking about these different cities implementing approval voting. So do you think the city-by-city local approach is the best strategy to get this spread far and wide?
That's essentially why I went with, I live in San Antonio, so going with approval voting San Antonio instead of like the national approval voting thing.
Okay.
The organizational things you got to do for that are a lot more difficult to manage. There's also other people that have actually done something like that, so it's a little more difficult to coordinate with some of them. I have tried some of that, but also just think about the local approach. I can't speak for other states. I know Texas very well. Texas has the home rule city system. So essentially, if you have a town of more than 5,000 people, you fall under a home rule town for the most part, and you have the ability to implement the system in a locality. And once you get enough cities that start doing this, then you already have your base of people that already understand it. And so if you're able to, start a movement to get it implemented in the state, you can do it from there. And that's really how the alternative voting systems have kind of worked in the past. Of course, the two main ones have been, of course, the ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting, and they would start off in cities. There's San Francisco, I believe Oakland, Minneapolis, and eventually they got a state. I believe Maine, in some of their elections now uses instant runoff voting.
Yeah.
So that's really how you got to do it. You got to do grassroots and build it up. But
okay.
If you find a small enough town, if you get enough advocates, you really can make it happen in a city. You just got to have the energy and to build up that organization.
That's inspiring. That's good optimism.
It can happen. I think it probably will happen as well.
Awesome. So what activities are you doing to promote this cause? How are you advancing it, and how are you spreading the message?
Okay, so right now the approval voting San Antonio is more or less dormant at this point. There's a lot more activism going on. A number of years ago there, actually I pushed it, of course, in Austin you have the same situation where you have your main city and you have all the other municipalities that are probably in Travis County up there.
Yeah.
10, 20 of them or so. So we have a number of those, and one of them was Live Oak. So at that time, my friends and I, fellow advocates, we put together a very good-looking brochure, a trifold. We would put the trifold in, I believe at that time we used newspaper bags to put that in there, and we would hang it on doornails. And Live Oak has 4 voting precincts. Because if you don't know that, a voting precinct is the smallest size unit of a political unit. It's where basically everyone on election day goes to do their voting at the ballot box. It's the voting location, not for early voting, which is only a handful of locations. This is however many there are in Austin. San Antonio, I want to say there's 770 or so.
Wow.
Divisions of these voting precincts. But Live Oak has 4. So essentially, and I don't think all of them are some of them are business districts. They don't have a whole bunch of people.
Oh, they don't.
So there might have only been 3 that we had to block walk. So I block walked the full precinct. Every house in that precinct got a door hanger. And at least it got enough to get a city council person interested in it. So I did get a call back from a city council person. We never actually ended up setting up a meeting to explain that to the person, but it goes to show that if you put the effort in, a little bit of money, a lot of steps, a lot of walking, it can make a difference. And they usually suggest the first way to do it is, get the, city council behind it. If you can somehow get them to do it, it's usually easy for them to vote on it and implement it. But if that doesn't work, and lots of times people got elected with one system aren't in favor of changing it, you can do the ballot initiative drive and get it implemented that way. To get on the ballot and then have the people vote, so you have to persuade enough people to vote in favor of it. So that was my strategy back then was to find a fairly small town that we could handle with the small number of volunteers we had that were near San Antonio and get implemented there, and then they would be, of course, the first town to have implemented it. So at this point, they'd be the first in Texas, not the first in the country.
Okay. Okay.
So that happened, and at that point it fizzled out. Things got busy. As is the case many times, you have a lot more time to deal with political matters back when you're in college and early in your career than later on when things really get rolling. So that's what happened to this organization.
Okay. Okay.
But
maybe we have listeners out there who can reignite it.
Well, I hope so. That's why I'm keeping things going, hoping to get someone like that to call up and try and get some of these materials. Essentially, I set it up. Of course, the big advocate for approval voting is the Center for Election Science.
Okay.
And they're fantastic at it. They have great materials, but they don't have the same name as actually getting it implemented as coming up with a separate organization just called approval voting. They say Center for Election Science, they get in the depths there. There's all sorts of different voting systems that they mathematically evaluate and do their science on, but basically they would say the best thing to do in this situation is approval voting. You gotta transition it from the center to have its own organization with the name approval voting on it. So there's materials that essentially slap on Austin, or wherever you happen to live on it, and then you can use the same model and use it where you live. Start up your own group.
Oh, good. That's a good strategy.
So that is the hope. I basically have the Facebook group still going. Websites cost money, so did we ever do one there? I don't think we ever necessarily did a website on it. We just stuck to Facebook.
Okay.
On that one. So the hope is that someone carries on the torch.
Oh, good. So if somebody out there, they want to do this, would the best way for them to go about it to contact you through the Facebook page?
Yes. I'll suggest that, and then we can exchange emails, phone numbers needed, and we can communicate that way.
Okay. All right, listeners, for those of you who want to do that type of activism, you can contact James at the Facebook page, and I plan to put that in the show notes.
That would be good.
All right.
Very helpful. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. James, we thank you for sharing what you've been doing with approval voting and your experience with political activism.
Well, again, thank you for having me on. I appreciate having the ability to talk about something I care about deeply.
Of course, that's our pleasure. So, James, we wish you all the best in your activism, in your career, everything you do in your personal and professional life.
And same to you.
All right. Take care and all the best.
All right. Bye-bye.